Damage numbers do not matter for DPS or duelists. In fact, if you have a ton of damage numbers but do not have any final hits, you're probably losing the game for your team. My name is iRunShib, and today we're going to be discussing how to play the roles effectively in terms of what stat lines you should actually care about. So let me put this in perspective for you DPS players. If you have a ton of damage but you don't have any final hits, what you are likely doing is pumping into the tanks or people on the front line. They're getting healed up, which ultimately is going to hurt your team because the enemy team strategists are going to be pumping their heals into the front line and getting their ultimates, which are by far the best ultimates in the game. So essentially what you're doing is you're a battery for the other team strategists to ensure that they're constantly able to use these invulnerability ultimates. Instead, what I really want you thinking about is final hits. That is your job as a duelist. That's the only stat that should really matter to you. So as you can see, we have 3 DPS on my team and they're all battling with each other as to who did the best. And let me explain my breakdown of this situation. Really good stat line here by Spin, who is 20-2 on Star-Lord. And he has 12.6k damage, which is over a third more than the other DPS. Our Magic and Bucky were getting into it with each other, talking about who had the most impact. And although Magic had a better KD, I would go on a limb and say that Bucky had more of an impact because he had more final hits. There is something to be said about fighting the tank to gain ult charge and then trying to use your ult to get value, and that makes sense. But if there's a 3 support ultimate where the team is running 3 supports that are going to hard counter every ultimate in the game, let's say they're running Cloak, Luna, and Mantis, and they all have defensive ultimates, your ult that you're building for is of 0 value because they will use to cancel it every single time. So instead of just pumping into the tank, I would hard focus on finding an off angle and picking off one of those supports or forcing them to use an ultimate without you using your own. Now let's talk about Vanguards. Vanguards, me personally, I'm more so looking at your KD because that shows me the impact that you've had. Damage blocked is something people like to look at, but in the end of the day, if I'm standing on the payload and just holding shield all the time, I'm not really getting a ton of value. I can get a ton of damage blocked that way, but your job should be looking at available targets, finding an opportunity to take them out if they're secluded, and capitalizing. If I'm on something like Doctor Strange, I can get a ton of confirmed final hits because of his E button. It does allow you to confirm a lot of those KOs, but I will say that the vast majority of players that are showcasing and shining on Vanguard typically have a good KD. That shows me that you're able to survive intense situations and you're able to be involved in some of these takedowns. Damage numbers are good, damage blocked is good, but in the end of the day for Vanguard, that's where KD I would say is more impactful. If you have 2 Vanguards, you may want to go for more of a KO playstyle and try to get something that have more final hits, but in the end of the day, especially as a Vanguard, the main stat line you should care about is your KD. For strategists, honestly, healing is very important, and I like to see high numbers. That's always going to be a big importance, but I would say that the only stat that I really care about is the amount of times you've fallen in the match. If you've been KO'd the least in the entire match, it shows me that you have really good positioning and you know when to use your ultimate. You're counter-ulting on some of these big ultimates in the game that can take out your team, and you have good positioning that's not getting you picked off 24/7. If you are close on heal numbers but have less times that you've been KO'd, it shows me that you played the game better than somebody that has a ton of heal numbers but have fallen more times in the battle. Save yourself cooldowns like freeze, sleep for when people are diving you.